Hello and welcome to Greater Purpose Community Church. We're trying something a little bit different. We're going to be doing the sermons out of my living room to give you more of an intimate vibe and also to have less distractions audibly in the background. So we're giving this a go this week. And we're doing so at kind of an awkward time because we're coming in at the end of a 3-year deep dive into the Gospels, and we are wrapping up our discussion around the Jesus Seminar's compilation of the verses that they were fairly certain were taught and upheld by the early church, and these are from the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Thomas. It's a very select group of verses, but again, these are the ones that these historians feel best represent the theology of the early church, and with that said, we're going to dive right in. The scripture says this: "Suppose you have a friend who comes to you in the middle of the night and says to you, 'Friend, lend me 3 loaves, for a friend of mine on a trip has just shown up and I have nothing to offer him.' And suppose you reply, 'Stop bothering me. The door is already locked and my children are in bed. I can't get up to give you anything.' I'm telling you, even though you won't get up and give him anything out of friendship, you will get up and give him whatever he needs because of his shameless behavior. Who among you would hand a son a stone when he's asking for bread? Again, who would want to hand him a snake when he's asking for fish? Of course, no one would. So if you, worthless as you are, know how to give your children good gifts, isn't it much more likely that your Father in the heavens will give good things to those who ask him?" Now, one thing that was brought up this past week during the observation portion of our service, where we discuss our observations with our community members, is the terminology found in the verse that says, "If you, worthless as you are, know how to give your children good gifts, isn't it much more likely that your Father in the heavens will give good gifts?" This has often been taught in churches that we're worthless, we're sinners. And we kind of read this, and many historians read this as Jesus joking, Jesus saying something in jest. So we definitely don't want to preach that anyone watching this or anyone in our community is worthless, because you're not. You're all children of the divine. But moving on, in this opening passage, the author is utilizing the shame-honor culture that was upheld in ancient Mediterranean societies. And at first glance, it makes the reader assume that the person providing the food has a good conscience and that he will self-motivate to do the right thing. Let me nip that fairy tale in the bud right now. If folks that had the means to provide for people that are struggling, if they actually had good consciences, then Flint, Michigan would have had clean water. Big Pharma would be regulated and would have been regulated a long time ago. Schools would be equally funded by now. The environment would be cleaned. Forests would be preserved. Reparations would have been made already, and poverty would have died a long time ago. But luckily, if we dig a little bit deeper into the historical context that the author lived in, we can see that this, in fact, was the exact point that they were trying to make as well. Because according to the fellows within the Jesus Seminar, the shame and honor culture was paramount for social status, and shame is something that could have easily demolished someone in this ancient world. Now, why do I say that? Because there often were not written contracts that were utilized in this society, so many agreements between people depended on each person keeping their word. Which is why there is a passage in the scripture that says, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no." It is an ancient way of saying keep your word, because back then your word and your honor were literally everything. Also, we can look at the ceremonies found in ancient Judaic culture to see that when someone gave their word, it was taken. Also, we can look at the ancient ceremonies found in Judaic culture to see that when someone gave their word, it was taken very seriously. Oftentimes, ancient Hebrews would sacrifice animals, and they would line a path with fragments of these animal body parts, and as they would recite a commitment to each other, as they would enter into contract with someone else, they would walk the path between these sacrificed animal parts. And the path lined with these dismembered corpses was a symbolic statement that was basically saying to each party that if I don't follow through with things on my end, let it be done to me what has been done to these dead animals. This very serious ceremony was structured around the premise of trust and reputation. In such a culture where your word is your bond and trust is paramount, what do you think that shame would do to your ability to enter into negotiations and contracts? It would make it difficult because no one would trust you, which means no one would want to make agreements, aka in the scriptures, covenants with you. They may not want to have a contract or a covenant with you to barter goods and or produce. And in contrast, being shamed this day and age means you simply might lose a few Facebook friends, right? You might lose some Instagram followers, or you might lose some Twitter fans. But being shamed in the ancient world of modern day Palestine meant that you may not be able to provide for you and possibly your entire tribe. So in short, shame in that time was a possible death sentence. Of course, this person got up in the middle of the night to provide food for their neighbor, because not doing so meant that they could possibly be shamed. They wouldn't just lose some followers on the gram. Not providing for a neighbor in need meant that they might lose the trust that people have in them, in their community, if word got out about their indifference, about their lack of compassion. And this is where things get a little bit radical, as Jesus does throughout the scriptures. You see here, this guilt trip from the neighbor approaching this person in the middle of the night, this guilt trip is being mobilized as a form of subversive manipulation. And this is another example of nonviolent agitation utilized by the early church. And if you would like, look back at our previous videos, because we talk about this a lot. The early church was definitely a nonviolent revolution. And I love how the Gospels talk about how to play dirty in the holiest way possible. The Gospels teach us how to fight without violence, how to destroy without burning, how to harm someone with love. Paradoxically, it's a book of brilliant strategies about how we can face an enemy that could kill us on a whim if they wanted to, how to take down systems of governance without ever having to lift a finger to harm anyone. But the most important theme in today's passage is a willingness to do whatever it takes within the margins of nonviolent subversion to get done whatever needs to be done. Now, there's another verse that the fellows at the Jesus Seminar connects with the one in today's reading, and it's this. You've probably heard it before. It says, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, you'll find. Knock, it'll be open for you. For everyone who asks receives. Everyone who seeks finds. And for the one who knocks, it is opened." Now, of course, this statement has been a great marketing tool for ministers like Joel Osteen, right? They teach that Jesus is like a genie in a bottle. You just have to believe. You just have to pray the right way. You just got to rub that lamp just right. And you can be rich, or you can have that car, because Jesus is going to magically manifest these material possessions for you. They call it name it and claim it. Just have faith. Put out the right vibes in the universe. Take your pick of the language that you want to use. It's all garbage theology, no matter what faith it's guzzied up in. You heard correct. And I rarely say this because I usually just pick on Christians, but Christians are not the only spiritual leaders that weaponize this kind of rhetoric for their own personal gain. Folks like Marianne Williamson and Tony Robbins, they're not Christians, but they certainly regurgitate the same kind of nonsense. They just package it differently. Robbins says things like, the only things that are holding you back in life are your own lack of ambitions and your own lack of motivations. And Marianne Williamson says things like, keeping your goals from manifesting are the thoughts that you are putting out, the negative thoughts that you are putting out into the universe. And none of these three people, Joel Osteen, Marianne Williamson, or Tony Robbins, they don't share the same faith identity, but there is one thing that all three of them have in common. They are all multi-millionaires that have built their financial empires on the backs of the oppressed by giving people a false sense of empowerment with teaching them to believe things the right way if they want their life to be better. And the problem with that logic is that it fails to incorporate systemic issues that are at play and levied against folks on the margins. Racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, even fat phobia. These are all things that cannot be overcome simply by displaying a positive attitude. They are systemic issues that must be confronted head on. So, if you'd like, pick your poison as far as language is concerned. But the point remains that Jesus, God, Goddess, the universe, spirit, crystals, vibrations, the gods, they are not genie bottles. I wish it worked like that as a minister. Life would be dope. My job would be way easier because it would be so easy to sell folks Christianity. Oh, you've got an illness? You are diagnosed with cancer? You just have to believe the right way. Poof, diagnosis gone. You're healed. Awesome. Now come to church. Do you need lots of money? Are you in debt? Just believe the right way. Boom, you're a millionaire. Don't forget to tithe 10% though. You want to look like Chris Pine or Idris Elba? Just believe the right way and things will happen. I've tried that one before. It didn't work. But going back to the beginning of my rabbit trail, what do you think that Jesus is asking others to do when he tells them to ask, seek, and knock? I believe he's telling them not to be afraid to challenge the way things are. You see, Jesus constantly challenged people to seek a new and better way and to have faith that everything will work itself out if we collectively seek. As far as seeking goes, it's a verb here. If we collectively seek a better way, not just believe specific things or not just emote specific feelings, but actually put legs to our beliefs. The second part of today's verse goes on to draw imagery from parenting. And I'll ask all my viewers this. If your kid was hungry, are you going to give them some sushi? Are you going to give them some poke? Or are you going to give them rattlesnakes to eat? You're going to give them the fish, right? And what the author is trying to stir in the hearts of the reader is a sense of hope and faith. Hope that despite what we are up against, all things will work out if, and only if, we have the courage to put hands and feet to our inspirations, to our dreams, to our initiatives, to our goals. And if we're willing to stir the pot, meaning thoughts and prayers and vibrations in the universe, those things are nice, but you can't Care Bear stare this stuff into being. You actually have to physically, with your body, with your efforts, with your daily ambitions, you have to seek this brave new world out. And within this passage, the author of this verse presents the belief that Spirit, God, Goddess, the universe, whatever language you want to use, is on the side of the marginalized and the brutalized, the broken and the beaten, the poor and the lowly. And this was a novel concept in the ancient world. And sadly, it still is today. You see, throughout the empires of Scripture, Rome, Egypt, and Babylon, their pantheon of gods uplifted those that were in seats of authority over the rest of the populace. In the minds of empire, the divine's favor rested on the powerful. Yet here, in today's passage, is this subversive radical rabbi that challenged this notion by saying that God's ear will forever tip in favor of the meek and the downtrodden. And once again, I say this, sadly, 2,000 years later, and the church that Jesus started, the community, the ecclesia that Jesus started, is preaching the polar opposite of the ethos that Jesus did regarding God's favor. They are teaching that God's favor rests with the powerful, with the corrupt, with those in unjust positions of authority. And nothing could be further from the teachings of Jesus. In fact, I would argue it is anti-Christ. It is the anti-Jesus version of the Bible, the antithesis of everything that the early church stood for. You see, Christians still believe that God somehow places tyrants in positions of power. People like the tyrant turd, aka Trump, in the White House. Christians believe that God put him there, which is absurd because the problem with the American church is that American Christians put him there. And now, sadly, this past week, as things have been unfolding with polls and with the Democratic primary, we even see folks on the left that are Christians thinking that Bloomberg's presence in the race is a good thing. And within both schools of thought, it is clear that humanity still believes that powerful means favorable, that financial prowess equates to equity. How broken have we become to still adhere to such diabolical systems of belief? This week, I got into a pretty heated debate with a fellow left-leaning minister online, and this person was spouting off about how socialism is anti-American and how it's not biblical, which is ridiculous because Jesus was pretty much a socialist. And me, being the patient person that I am, chose to listen and hold space for them. That's totally a lie. I ate this person's lunch. I was ready with statistics and facts and verses while I was defending this outlandish idea that people deserve dignity and that our value is not dependent on our level of productivity and necessities like health care and food and clean water. These things should be human rights. Now, side note, if you don't agree with anything I just said and you need proof that Jesus was all for universal health care, in the Gospels, when Jesus healed people that were sick, that were dying, Jesus never asked if they were in network, and he never asked for a copay. Jesus just healed people. Hashtag just saying. So after this heated exchange, back to the story, what I realized is that both myself and this minister truly believed that social democracy is ethical. But whether it's possible or not, that's where we disagreed. And that's why today's verse is so meaningful. You see, we don't need to understand how justice will become manifest. We just need to start walking the path. Because the solutions will come, but if we never take the first step on a journey toward betterment, then of course things will never change. What I'm trying to say, if you remember nothing else about today's sermon, is that we have to believe enough in the finish line to at least start the damn race. But to be honest, the moment that we take that first step, the moment that we start the race, the more absurd those initial objections will become. Folks say things like, well, what about the economy? Y'all, who designed the economy? Humans did. We did. We can make a new one. And if this one doesn't work for everyone, then we should make a new one. But the earth is already $20 trillion in debt. Who the hell do we owe money to? The Decepticons? Like, in all seriousness, oftentimes we are so afraid to change what is that we never dare to ask what can be. Or better yet, what should be. And the problem with pursuing ambitions is that we're often limited by our perceptions of reality, and we're hindered by the limitations of corrupt systems that currently exist. We can't see around them. We can't ask what's possible because everything seems impossible right now because the world is broken. Let me give you an example. People often ask me, when racial justice comes up in conversation, how do we fit reparations into the existing economy? And the truth is, we can't, because the economy is racist. But there is a better question. You see, the better question is, how do we create a new economy that allows for reparations and economic justice for people that our nation has harmed? That's a better question. People ask, how can we afford the Green New Deal when it costs trillions? One, at this point, how can we afford not to? I mean, the world is dying. But a better question is, how can we create a new society in which environmental health is factored into the GDP? Again, that's a much better question. People ask, how can we afford these refugees in this country when there are so many homeless veterans on the streets? That's another terrible question. On the contrary, we should be asking how we can make an economy that is not dependent on warfare to thrive and that has safety net programs for all people. How can we afford these refugees in this country when there are so many homeless veterans on the streets? That's another question I get often. And it's a terrible question. But on the contrary, how can we make an economy that is not dependent on warfare to thrive and that has safety net programs for all people? Better yet, how can we take care of those that are victims of American foreign interference in which it destabilized foreign economies, thus creating refugees in the first place? And more importantly, how can we look ourselves in the mirror if we continue to submit to a tyrant that has locked kids in fucking cages? Those are much better questions. What I'm trying to tell you today, you see, the two most dangerous words to tyrants and leaders that sow injustice are what if. Be brave enough to forge them and wield them often, knowing that the God of the oppressed, the spirit of the lowly, the universe that binds all things together, and dare I say, a divine chain breaker is with our every step. And until next week, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wastelands and protect you through the storms. May it bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that it shows you, and may it bring you home rejoicing once again into your doors. Grace and peace to you.